participative organizations based on a quite sophisticated methodology. I won't enter into details. But we also hear very much from organizations that are not part of the system. We hear, depending on the topics, from the private sector, from the civil society, and I think cloud computing is a subject on which indeed we have to hear from other players. For those who are really interested to know more about the Joint Inspection Unit, there are a number of leaflets available at the entrance on the table. Now, we want to take this review, which we consider that is more and more important for the United Nations systems. First of all, we are having in mind a sort of transition from the current situation in general in using IT services and in particular in migrating on cloud services because this kind of decision apparently they are rather ad hoc, instinctive, driven by the market, not by the real needs. We do not measure properly what kind of issues we have to deal with. So this is more or less an attempt to bring some light into this area. So the objective number one of our project will be to raise awareness about the specificity of cloud services and inform the decision-making people in the legislative bodies, in the senior management, when, to help them make informed decision when they developed any sort of policies and practices on cloud computing. We also want to demonstrate that cloud computing, contrary to what some people believe, is not an IT matter. Cloud computing is a governance matter. We have to deal seriously with issues of, such as control over data, the risk management, the protection of privacy and confidentiality of institutional data, the continuity of services, and the efficient use of services. I would say that our middle name in GIU is efficiency. We are supposed, in whatever we do and recommend, to increase efficiency in the use of resources. Obviously, the first result of the review will be a diagnosis of the existing situation, in the sense that we will undertake a comparative analysis of policies, frameworks, practices, and processes in the 28 organizations that are part of our constituencies. Then the next, let's say, ambition of this project will be really to generate preventive policies and action to enhance preparedness in using the cloud services. How to harness the power of the cloud solutions effectively, how to maximize investments, how to mitigate risk, how to anticipate the problems before actually entering into concrete transaction. It seems that these issues are not properly addressed, or at least they are not addressed the way any action and policy that uses the public resources available for the United Nations is supposed to address. And then we, based on the assumed elasticity of the cloud services, we'd like to find ways to not only to really increase efficiency, but also try to see whether we can pool resources. One of the problems of the United Nations system is that we are a system, but we still continue to work in silos. So maybe the cloud computing is yet another door open to the possibility to pool resources and to make concerted actions that will help the organizations individually and the system as a whole. In terms of specific objectives of this report, yes, we will examine the level and the potential of the integration of cloud solutions as they are currently in the system. We want to see if we can move to a higher level of coherence in the cloud architecture in the UN system. We'll be trying to develop, or at least to suggest benchmarks to support the future developments and adaptation of business models in our organizations in relation with the cloud computing. But then that would be more or less our missions. But before ending, I would like to make a precision about the nature of the relationship between the panelists and the audience in this case. Usually you do ask questions to the panelists. You expect the answers from the panelists. I would say that in my case, it is the other way around. We are trying to hear from you. We know that the biggest challenge in our review will be to address the right questions, the most pertinent questions. So we are not even ready with the questions that are best suited to the analysis we are trying to understand. So we are much less equipped to respond to that questions. But the problems faced in relation to the cloud computing, I think they are common whenever it is, if it is about the United Nations system, which is a group of organizations working together, guided by the same principle and values, and the problems faced in individual organizations. We have the same issues of confidentiality, of privacy, of legal aspects, intellectual property aspects, etc., etc. So there is nothing in your experience that might not be relevant for our own research. So we are at the beginning of this research. I would say that we didn't even started the research. This panel is one of the occasion we created just to hear from people, from experts like you. And thank you very much, Jovan, for giving us the possibility.
Thank you, Petru. Therefore, we'll have questions with the questions, and that is probably the key, and that could be the key outcome of our discussion today, to add to some issues that Jorge and Petru and their colleagues will have to answer when they start officially their work on the report in 2018. It will be most likely in March 2018, Petru?
We'll start even earlier. So mentally, although formally it's not yet there, but mentally we started to prepare. So we can engage into dialogue as of today.
Thank you. Great. Now we set the stage for discussion, and I'm sure you will get some questions now after the Prado's presentation on technical aspects on cloud computing, and what the UN ICC is doing, and what we can expect from them and other official providers of cloud computing worldwide. As you know, one of the dilemma in cloud computing is, should UN agencies outsource it to big cloud computing providers like Amazon, Microsoft, or have it more in-house provided by, among other players, UN ICC, United Nations International Computing Center. Prado, please.
Thank you very much. So thank you very much, Jovan, and thank you very much, Inspector Petru, for the opportunity to be here and share what we are doing. So I'm very grateful. So the agenda will be very quickly who we are, what is cloud, some information about cloud, what is the evolution of the state of cloud within the UN system, and options for the UN system cloud deployment. Let me start. Who is UN ICC? We are not the International Criminal Court, like everyone may think. We are a United Nations International Computing Center, and we are a United Nations organization created by a resolution of the General Assembly in 1970s, with a clear mission of provide ICT services for the UN system, for the UN family, with the goal of maximizing sharing infrastructure, maximizing sharing skills and knowledge across the UN family, and therefore generate economy of scale to benefit the UN system. Therefore, our parent founders, they had this advanced mindset without maybe them knowing it clearly. They created near 50 years ago a UN private cloud, because you see our mission is the mission of a cloud, but within UN. Therefore, our data centers have UN jurisdiction and protect privileges and immunities within UN. We have offices in Europe, Switzerland, Spain, Italy, as well as in US. Why UN ICC has a key position within the UN system to know what is happening in terms of technology, in terms of cloud strategy? The reality is that all our partners are sitting in our board. They are our clients, and they are also our board. They share with us their strategy, where they want to go, and they ask for help for them to go there. So all of them are our partners, and these are partners and clients because we are also supporting international non-profit organizations worldwide. We started as an organization 50 years ago, only with a couple of clients, partners, WHO, UNDP, UN, where we were setting mainframe services. It was the time of mainframe services, and the General Assembly was trying to avoid that each organization were building their own mainframes. So we started in this kind of cloud offering, and we have, of course, moved from mainframe to much more advanced IT services. So what is cloud? Everyone knows that cloud is a big number of servers sitting in a location that is non-expensive, where we can share resources between different end users to maximize cost effectiveness. Very important is to realize the cloud delivery model. The difference between on-premise delivery model, where yourself, you manage all the stack, all the services from up to down, and we are familiar with infrastructure as a service, platform as a service, software as a service. That the difference between both of them, all of them, is just where the split starts between what is your responsibility and what is the cloud provider responsibility. Because even when you go to cloud, depending on which model you are using, you are still responsible of part of the service. So this is the cloud delivery model. If you see UN ICC service delivery model, you will see that a big part of our portfolio we are already calling software as a service, platform as a service, infrastructure as a service, because as I've said before, we are providing cloud services, UN proud services to UN. And a part of that portfolio, we have services to integrate with that public cloud. So we have the UN private cloud that can be integrated, needs to be integrated in some cases with the public cloud. And also there is an important component for advisory services, because our partners need to know what is the risk of going to the cloud. They may need help for doing cloud assessments, they may need help to do security assessment before going there, and so on. Okay, so what is stopping the UN system to move forward to the cloud? I think my colleague Christina may go more in depth later on these topics, but the main ones could be, okay, the fear, the risk that the service provider could be misusing information obtained, and also that they are not honoring the UN privileges and immunities. And of course, well, there is a more exhaustive list provided by Cloud Security Alliance. And of course, the risk that a potential state actor could be accessing through legal means, between quotes, information to the public cloud provider. But it's clear that we have strong benefits to go to the cloud. Agility, there is as the services are standard, the deployment, the provision of services are very quickly done. Performance and resiliency, the public cloud providers have data centers worldwide replicated. Security, again, the standardization of their offering makes it easier to secure it because you don't have legacy system with operating systems that are outdated, that you cannot have patches to support them, and so on. Innovation. Of course, they have a strong expertise that can be up to the latest technologies and that are very difficult for each of the UN agencies to have these skill sets at home. As I have said before, cost effectiveness, and this is key for UN because UN is having a hard time, he's always having hard times related to budget. So this is a very important benefit. And risk mitigation, because it's more and more important to be aware that the different providers that we are using in terms of technology, they want to push UN to the cloud, and they are suggesting that in the future, this and this and this technology may not be offered on premise. So we need to be aware that we could mitigate risk if this technology is not on premise but in the cloud. So this is a fact. But we also need to be aware of challenges that the organizations that has moved to the cloud are facing. There is a very important report that RightScale is doing every year, I think that for the last 6 or 7 years, related to the use of cloud. This is a report not for the UN system, because the UN system is not so advanced in that evolution, but for all the business. And they have identified what are the top 5 challenges within the cloud, depending on the maturity of the organization. It's very, very significant to see that although security is very important for the cloud beginners, it's not so important when an organization is cloud focused, because I would say that they have done the homework to be ready to go to the cloud. But managing cost, that it was not so important originally, it becomes one of the top 5 challenges, to the point that they have found that the challenge of managing cost in public cloud is important, and there is an actual waste between 30 to 40% of the usage. And this is very, very important. Also,
just to clarify this 30 to 40% of what usage of.
So yeah, let me maybe give a couple of clear examples. So it's clear that when a business unit within the UN system needs to do an event, and they need a server to be prepared for the event, they notify the IT department, and they turn on this server in the cloud. It's also frequent that they are not so agile, notifying that the event has ended. So the server can be there, up and running, without nobody using it. Another clear example that we are seeing, when there is a new staff in the organization, or a new consultant, a new internship, HR notifies to the IT system to create an account, an email account. When the colleague leaves, sometimes it's not so agile, that notification. And we have seen email accounts that they are leaving without nobody using it, and the organizations still pay for them. So this is
out of inertia.
Yeah, because if you don't decommission the account, you continue paying for it. You continue paying for it.
It happened to VPN.
Yeah, it happens everywhere. So this will be very important, and I will highlight later why it's very important, this fact. Also, I wanted to share with you, as part also of the RightScale report, the distribution of the evolution of the state of the cloud. I need to insist that this is not within the UN system, because the UN system is much risk averse because of these specific threats that are specific for them. But as you see, I would say the big conclusion that they are taking is that the hybrid cloud is the preferred enterprise strategy. There haven't been a very big evolution from 2016 to 2017, and still all the organizations out there, they are realizing that they need an hybrid cloud because there are data that they are very comfortable to move to the public cloud, and that there are other data that they are not so comfortable to move to the public cloud, and they would like to keep it on-premise or in a private cloud. So a reflection aloud with all of you is, okay, UN system will have to go to the public cloud. We'll go to the public cloud. We need to do it because we are constantly under pressure to provide high-quality services and innovative solutions under a continued budget reduction. So as cloud cost effectiveness is one of the benefits, we need to evaluate that. But we need to be very careful because, as we have seen already, there is the challenge to manage this cloud cost. So if we are moving to that path, because cost effectiveness is key for us, and there is this risk of not being able to manage that cost, there is a red warning there for UN. Also, we need to be aware that we would need an hybrid cloud in general within the UN system, because there will be always data that we cannot have it in the public cloud. And now I will share with you a couple of options of what could happen in the future. Well, it's clear that, as I have said, my prediction is that UN system will go to the public cloud. No matter what we do, the only thing that we can do is to help them doing the risk assessment, to help them doing the IT strategy, to the cloud strategy, security checks, and so on. And we are already doing that. UN ICC is already helping our partners to go to the cloud, doing migrations, making sure that they have enough expertise. But this is the UN Organization A that will have still their, this is the primary data center connected to the disaster recovery data center. And even if they go to the cloud, as they will still want to keep some data outside the public cloud, they will still have their own data centers in place. Maybe they don't need so much capacity. Maybe they will be able to negotiate the rent, reduce electricity, but they will still need the cooling, electricity, the management of the data centers. Again, they will have connectivity to the public cloud, one public cloud provider, even two public cloud providers, and because there are an offering out there. We have the same one for the second organization, and so on for the rest. We will end like that. Still our data centers, still connected with our DRs, and all of us, even if we are sitting in the same cities, connected independently to the different cloud providers. To not confuse more the diagram, I have not drawn here that all of them are also connected with UN ICC, with the UN private cloud already. And I have not also drawn here that all of them are connected with all their country offices. Sometimes those country offices are in the same locations, like Organization A, that is sitting headquarters in the same location that Organization B, have country offices in the same locations as the other one, but they all have independent lines. So this is the strategic, what we can do. So I couldn't stop putting my dream here, because, okay, UN has a great goal, and UN system senior management has big responsibility, so that's why I thought, okay, let's do it. So UN has the UN private cloud with the UN jurisdiction. We can integrate information there, private information that we don't feel comfortable putting in the cloud, and consolidate connectivity to save cost for UN. So So that's all. Thank you
Thank
very
you,
much.
Christina. We have one clear option, which my guess, my sort of intuition is that it will become increasingly important. Because you mentioned some keywords, cost efficiency, risk avoidance, reliability, but what we are seeing as a trend in global affairs is that institutions and individuals are increasingly concerned about not only cost efficiency, but there is a slight shift towards the question, what is happening with my data, how they are protected. And I would say the UN system will probably have to address some issues like immunities and privileges, and I can see few colleagues in the room who can reflect. I know Mr. Markovic, who is over there, he's now working with UNDP in Serbia on some sort of cloud computing. Therefore, some of these issues in some form will be addressed over there, but you may reflect later on, and other colleagues whom I don't know well. One of the issues will be what to do with data's legal status, whether it is privileged immunities, whether it is data of European citizens. And now Christina will help us to guide us through the challenge, concretely speaking, of the new European General Data Protection Regulation and how UN can adjust to it, what we can do.
So good morning, everyone. Thank you very much, Jovan. Thank you, Petru, for the invitation. My name is Kristina Vasala-Kokinaki, and I work with the legal department of the International Organization for Migration. I'm particularly happy to be here today to talk about cloud computing, but also because it's the 18th of December and it's International Migrants Day. In my presentation, I will be bringing a legal perspective to cloud computing for international organizations. I'm not a technical expert. I'm a lawyer. I'm an international lawyer. I will be focusing on two legal matters. First of all, the issue that has been already brought up, the issue of privilege and immunities, and second, some considerations in terms of data protection, and the issues concerning the General Data Protection Regulation of the EU, the GDPR, an acronym we will be using during this presentation, will be addressed on the second part. Just to mention briefly, in terms of what Jovan already referred to earlier, IOM did a workshop in May, in which we had about 35 international organizations present. It was a workshop that lasted a day and a half. It was co-organized with the European Data Protection Supervisor. We addressed different issues. One of them was cloud computing. Another one was the GDPR. Another one was the processing of health data that are very often classified as sensitive data. And another issue was the role of the data protection officers, just for your information. If we're going to start with the status of international organizations. So international organizations enjoy privilege and immunities in order to ensure that they can function in an independent way. Privilege and immunities are given to international organizations by states. Most international organizations, such as the United Nations, enjoy PNI, let's call privilege and immunities PNI, because of multilateral treaties. There is a 1946 Convention on PNI, a 1947, one for the UN, one for specialized agencies, but there are also other conventions on PNI. Some organizations, including IOM, enjoy PNI based on bilateral agreements that are signed between the organization and the states. I've just put here examples of two PNI, immunity from jurisdiction and inviolability of archives, because these two come up very often in the cloud computing discussion. In the traditional setting, where you would have an organization having its servers on premises, in case there would be an interference and you would have government or state authorities, law enforcement agencies trying to access this data, an organization would argue that this is not possible because the archives and all documents of the organization are inviolable. This is the legal wording that would be used, and because the national legislation of the state would not be applicable to an international organization because of the immunity from jurisdiction. Just very briefly, the challenges, I don't want to mention them as risks because they're challenges and they can be mitigated. The challenges that are related to privilege and immunities and cloud computing. First of all, the location of the servers. This is a question that all international organizations have to answer at some point, which is the best location for the servers to be located if the data are going to be stored in the cloud. Should these servers be stored as close to the premises as possible? For example, if we're talking about an organization based in Switzerland, should the data be stored in Switzerland? Should they be stored in any country in which the organization enjoys good privilege and immunities, especially immunity from jurisdiction, or in which other location? Apart from the location of the servers, another important issue concerns transmissions of data. By using the cloud, transmissions are increased. When transmissions are increased, the possibility of interferences is increased as well. In addition to that, when an external cloud service provider is used, it's very often likely that this service provider will be using subcontractors. So the more subcontractors you have, the more the transmissions are increasing. Another issue linked to transmissions is that with the use of public cloud, for example, very often it's not possible to tell in one specific moment where the data is. Even the cloud provider themselves, they might not be able to answer this question. Therefore, the challenge is increased. We have requests from law enforcement agencies. This happens quite often to international organizations. You would have a request from the police to have access to a specific data set. Again, an international organization would be arguing immunity from jurisdiction, and the same would be done if there would be a request coming from judicial authorities. However, when we're using an external service provider, that external service provider cannot argue immunity from jurisdiction. It is more difficult to argue as well inviolability of archives because the data are being stored by the cloud service provider and not by the international organization themselves. In overall, the big challenge for international organization is the fact that they feel that they have no control over the data. In the traditional setting of having the data on premises, control is more clearly defined and it's more, the feeling of control at least is bigger. Whereas in the cloud setting, especially in the public cloud setting, there is the feeling that control is lost. In terms of data protection, I have just put here the logos of some organizations that already have in place some internal guidance on protection of personal data. As you can see, the UN is appearing first. The UN has a GA resolution from 1990 in which states and international organizations were encouraged to apply data protection principles. So that was in 1990. IOM issued its data protection policy in 2009, Interpol in 2011, ICRC and UNHCR in 2015, ILO, WFP in 2016. Other organizations, to my knowledge, do not have an internal data protection policy in place. Data in the cloud. This was already mentioned by Prado. Which data should be stored in the cloud? If we're talking about public cloud, which data can an international organization store in the cloud and which data shouldn't be stored in the cloud? For example, should personal data of beneficiaries, for example, in the case of IOM, or personal data of staff, sensitive data, should they be stored in the cloud? What about confidential data? The way that international organizations, and I'm sure the private sector is doing the same thing, is addressing this question is by having a very clear classification policy. However, even nowadays, there are organizations that do not have a classification policy. And even if there is a classification policy in place, there is no cloud computing policy to say these types of data, for example, in the case of IOM, secret and confidential cannot be stored in the cloud, whereas restricted data and public data could be stored in the cloud. The data protection issues linked with cloud computing. First of all, the jurisdiction of the cloud service provider. If the cloud service provider is operating in a country that has good data protection legislation, international organizations feel generally more comfortable. And from my experience, I've seen that international organizations would say, as long as the servers are based in a European Union country that has strong data protection rules, then we're all right. That's the safest place to have the data. There's the issue of data controller and data processor. International organizations want to be clear that they are the ones controlling the data, telling the cloud service provider what to do. However, this is not always possible, and in many cases, cloud service providers might be data controllers themselves. This legal image concerns the legal basis for processing data in the cloud. For international organizations to process personal data in particular, it's necessary to have a clear legal basis. The basis for storing this data in a cloud is separate from the basis of collecting the data. And this is always a very tricky issue. For example, in the case of humanitarian organizations, should a humanitarian organization be requesting consent from its beneficiaries, be it migrants, refugees, and so on, in order to store their data on the cloud? Encryption. Encryption is a very often mentioned tool in order to ensure greater data security. And encryption is very useful because in the cases of attempts of interference with the data of international organizations, it's deemed to be that if the data is encrypted and there are no backdoors, then even if the data are handed over to government authorities, then they will not be easy to read. However, encryption cannot be used on its own. There are many other controls that need to be put into place. You need to have access control, authentication, and so on. And then another issue about encryption concerns whether we're talking about end-to-end encryption, about encryption of data in transit or on-site. Auditing. In most cloud computing contracts, international organizations would really argue to be able to audit the cloud service provider at any time. And sometimes this clause would be accepted. In terms of data security, encryption was already mentioned, but an important issue here concerns retention of data. How long should data be kept in the cloud? And what would happen if the international organization decides to stop using a specific cloud service provider? How will it be guaranteed that the data are absolutely deleted? Can data be absolutely deleted nowadays? Is it possible? And of course, in the end, the issue of privilege and immunities. In a contract on cloud computing, there would be generally a clause saying that the cloud service provider needs to respect the privilege and immunities of the international organization. However, how does this work in practice? If we're talking about a cloud service provider that needs to follow also national legislation, usually the two issues are in contradiction. Very briefly, to touch upon the GDPR. The GDPR is of relevance to international organizations for two specific issues. First of all, concerning applicability. Article 3 of the GDPR has a very broad, describes a quite broad territorial scope of the GDPR. However, even if the territorial scope of the GDPR is very broad, international organizations still enjoy immunity from jurisdiction, which means that they are not subject to the national legislation of states, in this case of EU member states. Because the GDPR, be it a regulation, it will be directly applicable as national law to the member states on the 25th of May, 2018. However, the GDPR has a Chapter 5, and Chapter 5 is very much relevant for international organizations because it talks about transfers to third countries and international organizations. So international organizations are mentioned specifically inside the GDPR. And Chapter 5 is listing specific legal bases under which data controllers can transfer personal data to international organizations. If we have a quick look through these legal bases, the one that seems to be more appropriate would be the derogation of public interest, because international organizations are created for public interest purposes, and it makes sense that all transfers of personal data to them are taking place in order to serve the public interest purpose.
Thank you.
And
Thank
just
you.
leaving you with these observations and challenges for you to read.
We'll have 10 minutes.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Christina. I'm sure that, I don't know, Pedro and Jorge, how long do you plan your report? It will take 2 years with all of these aspects coming into it will be really, really demanding work with the legal, technical, and other aspects, which Prado and Christina brought out in such eloquent and great way. Thank you very much. What is probably first question that you can answer later on, but I'll open the floor for questions from our online public and colleagues here in the room, is practically speaking, on 26th of May, can Italy send their data, personal data to IOM without any sort of considerations about the GDPR and other? That could be, it's always good to answer concrete issues. Therefore, that could be one question. What IOM can use as, concretely speaking, any other organization in that context. But you may answer it later on when we collect the questions and comments from our audience. The floor is open, please. Could you introduce yourself if there is any question or comment? Jorge, please.
Yes, I would like to have a comment because on the legal part, I'm not that worried about the UN because it's about sharing knowledge and taking the right decisions, and the UN has enough offices to carry this out. On the first presentation, I'm extremely worried because knowing how the UN works, and I'm trying to open this so I get some input on our report, because I can visualize how we're going to do the legal part. And I know it's complex, but I think that there's really clear ways to go about it. And you mentioned the 1990 resolution, and it's very easy to follow up to now. But where I'm very concerned is, as you know, the UN works mostly with regular budgets and extra budgetary contributions. In the extra budgetary contribution, there'll be no resources. Almost very, very little for these aspects. Meaning there's some resources for UNHCR. Those resources will be for program delivery, but they will not include the cost for data protection. But when we talk about the regular budget of the UN, it's shrinking. And to make it clear, for instance, in 1976, when ITU introduced the first ERP package, there were a potential for the UN to have one ERP for the whole system. And what we found was that even in one organization, you were having then the three players, which it was Microsoft, Oracle, and SAP present. What I feel is that because the legislative bodies, when they're approving their budgets, they will take all the cut. They will take all the benefits from the ERP. But they don't have a master plan on how to go to the cloud. And what we'll find is that a lot of things that were presented in the presentation of Ms. Prado, there are already redundancies and there are already duplication in organizations that they're already with you, but they're also in the public cloud, and they're being, and I don't want to say this, they're being taken hostage by the private sector on that their programs that are already inside the UN, they're telling them, okay, we'll give you this service in the cloud, we'll give you this service in the cloud, and then they're absorbing these little resources that are left. So if people can help us on that, I would really appreciate it. I
can see some nodding in the room. Could you agree with this challenge? Could you just reflect on it? Could you,
Sorry.
Yes.
The microphone. The red button.
You could find cases in which you have on-site hosting in UN ICC, the private cloud of the UN, as we want to call it, hosting in the cloud already. So you have the three models sometimes at the same time, and this is not managed from an IT governance perspective at all. I completely agree with you. So there is a risk of losing control of the IT, strategy in the future, because you may be taken hostage by cloud providers. Some ERPs are already in the cloud, in the model of software as a service. So basically, nothing is on site anymore. So it's a risk I see as much as you.
And I think what Jorge also pointed out, there are need for additional resources, but at the same time there is a huge expectations that they will be cut in expenses. Therefore, you have in a way catch-22 situation for many organizations where financial people will expect to address some redundancies which exist, which we heard from the presenters, but in the same time you have to invest for in transition. Therefore, that will be one of the major challenges which our panelists may reflect. Barbara, do we have any question? Okay. Yes, there were questions. We'll start with you, Rado, and please.
So, okay, no, I don't know if you can hear me. So, I agree with you, Inspector Flores. I agree with you, but I am positive by nature, and therefore I want to remember that the General Assembly already created 50 years ago the UN Private Cloud. So we have seen, again, in this Red Scale report, they mentioned that it's complicated to create a private cloud. We are very lucky, we have one. So that gives me a lot of hope that with okay, thank you. So that gives me a lot of hope that with the suitable strategic motivation, we can do it. I mean, as I said, UN has a very ambitious mission, and UN system managers has a very big responsibility. We need to be aligned with that mission, and we can do it.
Thank you. Christina, what will happen on 26th of May? Well, except the nice morning in Geneva and places all over the world, spring?
This is not, I mean, this is a very tricky question to be answered in a simple way, I think. But just to say that in the scenario that you mentioned, if you have a data controller that is subject to the GDPR that wants to transfer personal data to an international organization on the 26th of May, they can very easily do so. I don't think that they would have a very big challenge. They just need to pick the right legal basis to do so. As mentioned already, public interest serves as a very good legal basis to transfer personal data to an international organization. So, yes, it can be done.
You don't envisage any major sort of big companies are now renting offices in Brussels big time, Facebook, Google, because it will be one of the major battle for their business model, what will happen on 26th of May. Do we have any other comments, question? Oh, that's fine. Oh, please. Well, whatever. You negotiate. Could you introduce yourself, please?
My name is HP de Groot. I'm from the Netherlands. I'm from a hosting company. We provide cloud services for human rights activists. But I'm also a member of the D Groups, board member of D Groups Foundation, which is fighting with the UN all the time to get access to internal and external spaces. But my question in this case, two questions. Additional consideration, environmental impact. Is that also an issue on the agenda to choose whether you're hosting environment neutral or not at all? Looking for green hosting, so to say. And the other question is, as you are dealing with public services, open source, is that also somewhere in the guidelines? Thank you.
One more question. Could you introduce yourself, please?
Yeah, my name is Andrew Sullivan. I'm a nerd. I'm not a lawyer. And I'm employed by Oracle, but I never speak for them. And I guess I have some questions about how, whether certain features that cloud service providers, including potentially Oracle, could offer would help you. So in particular, if you had good monitoring of cost, there were three things that struck me. The cost overrun kind of problem, which happens, I think, to every cloud customer. Secondly, the data storage rules, where are things held? And third, how data is passed, both what transit it takes and how it is handled while it's in there. And if there were handles for customers, either private or public sector or international or whatever, to be able to say, no, here are the policies that we want to apply to this. Would that be useful, or does that just seem like an extra thing that would be in the way but wouldn't actually solve the challenges that you're facing? And maybe you can't answer that today, but it would be really nice to see that in the report. Thank you.
We are fortunate, thank you very much. We are fortunate that there is no session after our session, because we are now coming close to the end of the proposed time. Is it correct? There is a session. Okay, okay. Now, just the quick answers from our panel, starting with Petru. You can pick on any of these few questions, and then.
Well, but as I promised, I don't have prepared responses to the questions. What I can say is that these are very important issues that we should take into account into our analysis, and including the issue of environmental impact. I think that's a very important question. I've heard recently that just one transaction on Bitcoin, it costs the energy of 8 households a month. That is amazing. That is amazing. So we really should not be taken away by the enthusiasm of IT and should take it over.
Any comment on the second question, the second set of questions?
Well, I don't think I have an answer. I think most of the answer lies for the time being in the diagnosis that already exists at the level of ICC, which will become a major partner in our review.
Few quick comments on the questions and.
So very quickly, I see that would be key tools to monitor the cost, as I said before. Once more, do we want to deploy those tools 100 times in each of the UN organizations, or can we consolidate the management of the cost of the cloud somehow to not avoid deploying it 100 times?
Thank you. And Christina, the concluding comment.
Yes, I will just bring it back to the beginning, to what Petru already mentioned, that cloud computing is a governance issue. Just to say that it needs to be dealt in a holistic way, and environmental impact, for example, would be addressed there in a more holistic way. Yeah.
Great. Thank you. Just the final concluding comment, Jorge.
Just on the answer, just very quickly. I think that what all companies, private sector, can help is in getting your act together. Meaning, the Office of Oracle in Switzerland acts completely different than the Office of Oracle in New York and the Office of Oracle in Italy, for instance. And that's something that for sure we're going to look at, because that cannot happen anymore. Thank you.
Thank you, Jorge. Thank you very much. Just a quick comment. We have very tolerant speakers for the next session. They are not complaining yet. Are you in charge of the next session? No? Oh, no. Okay, okay, great. Then as long as nobody complains loudly, we can continue. Please.
Just a quick one. In the decision-making for cloud models or what organizations should do, there is a good report on IT governance from the GIU, and the principles are there. So, I mean, the decision-making model is there that can be applied to also decision about cloud. So let's not forget about this.
Excellent. Another report which was prepared last year was the report on knowledge management. And you know, the whole confusion between data, information, knowledge could be used in this context as a sort of more revealing, because Inspector Dumitriu prepared a report on knowledge management, which will have some elements related to data and cloud computing. I think we have quite a few interesting insights, questions. We're looking forward to hear from you, Jorge and Petru, how the work will progress. I'm sure that you will find quite a few enthusiastic responses from colleagues if you ask us for help. I think that it will be extremely important report, not only for the UN, but also informative for other global organizations, because you will tackle all sorts of the questions which we listed, from technological, legal, economic, internal organization, question of privilege and immunities, and overall, I would say, function of international organization. Therefore, that would be interesting way to revisit some of the core issues related to reform of the UN and the various balances between efficiency and security, reliability. Therefore, good luck with this work and count on us. Thank you very much.
the gentleman
very
there.
smart.
Okay, okay. I will talk to him. Your next is one what?
That's your new colleague from
Hello.
the UN, Slobodan, and you know, you met
No,
few
that's
IT
so.
services like that. They are on the level of the
Thank you.
Pleased to meet you. And nice to have you. You know, this issue of a UN family not having a common, it's one of the specific issues that we have to deal with. It's amazing, and we should.
We're now starting developing a program for Serbian government support projects, a newly established office for IT and internet. And one of the components is support for building government cloud, for using.
Yeah, okay, good. So let's be in touch. Do you have a card? Or if not, send. Yeah, okay.
Let me grab it.
Okay, two. I have a colleague inspector. Sorry for. It was an exciting session. That is why we stayed behind. So, which we wish you as well. Huh?